For me, I've always had tremendous mentors. Was able to learn from folks that valued relationships and valued growing people. And I've been very, very fortunate that I've had bosses like that. That seems like that should be second nature to all leaders, but that's not always the case, right? I never feel like somebody's working for me. I always feel like they're working with me. And I genuinely want like a day where maybe I'm working for them eventually. That for me is success, right? I also appreciate it about you, somebody that I got a chance to work with. Like, you held us accountable. That was what I really appreciated about our relationship and our dynamic, was that you always spoke up and said what needed to be said in times where people were sometimes afraid to say those things. You actually took those opportunities to be able to lead us, even, no matter what your role was at the time, you were leading us as well.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to this. I'm your host, Shauna Griffiths, and today's Real Talk is with a real leader who's a 20-year plus veteran in the professional sports space. He is known for reimagining iconic brands and generating record revenues. He's a dear friend of mine and the Chief Commercial Officer of the New York Red Bulls. Joe Stetson, thank you so much for joining today.
Shauna, thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, folks, I always tell you how I know my guests, and Joe was my boss, air quotes boss. I say that because he was an incredible leader for me back in the Nets days when we were in the midst of New Jersey, but also building Brooklyn. And I think you actually came across on the Brooklyn sports and entertainment side from like 12 plus years at MSG. So it was such an exciting time. And I was so lucky, again, as I mentioned, to have you as a leader for me, and you really cared about me as a human and my development professionally. So like I said, I am so proud to have you here today, and I really appreciate all the impact you've had on my journey.
No, thank you. That was actually a beautiful way to discuss our time together. That was perfect. I want to capture that.
Well, we'll get into a lot more of that. But first of all, you are joining us from the New York Red Bulls stadium, and which is so exciting. You're in your off season, which is pretty much allowed you to actually take the time to spend with us today. So let's talk about the season that you just came off of. I think it was like your 14th in making it to the postseason. Is that right?
Yeah. We are. We have the longest active playoff streak of all North American sports leagues, over the 5 North American sports leagues. Yeah. So,
Wow.
14th straight season this year in the playoffs, which is impressive in many, many ways, but it's also a reminder of how hungry we really must be right now, because we are still trying to get that very first MLS Cup, that first championship. Yeah. And, 14 straight, it's great consistency. It's great consistency, and it's unique. I've been here for 10 of those seasons now, being here 9+ years. So it's great. It's great to be able to have that longest active streak.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes the off season can be kind of quiet for some folks for a short period of time. I say this from our time together. We know the off season, you have like 2 seconds to take a breath. But particular for you all, you're making a lot of moves in the coaching space, the administration on the team side. So I'm curious if you can speak to that at all, and more than anything, how you're managing that on the fan and your partner space.
Yeah, and you know what? Being a part of this industry for 20+ years, off seasons are always about opportunity, right? And on the personal side, there's always that opportunity or that chance that there's new personnel coming in, right? And in the case of our sporting director, who I've worked with for 9 years, who have really become close and dear friends with, as well as our coach who just came on board a couple of years ago, I've grown a relationship with. Those things happen in this industry, unfortunately, right? But in sports, always like I said, it's always about opportunity, right? So each season's a fresh start. And even during this very short off season, MLS has got the shortest off season of all sports leagues. By the way, it's super quick. But especially in leagues in North America where there's a lot of parity, there's always that opportunity that each season you can win a championship, and truly believe that you can. So realizing that opportunity and truly showing signs of growth, to our fans, to our partners, that's the key on both the soccer side as well as the business side.
Yeah, yeah. I love it when we first started talking, you talked about like the hunger. And I think that is so important for those partners and the fans to hear is like, we're hungry to get that we haven't, that championship we haven't before. And then the team's willing to make the moves to help make that. So there's always some risk there, but I think that's game. I mean, pardon the pun, but game changing.
Yeah, no, and it is, right? I mean, where you talk about game changing, like being in this market where there's 13
Oh
professional
yeah.
sports franchises, right? Like, knowing that we've been being able to extend our season into postseason 14 straight years, where
Yeah.
I think the next closest one, I don't even know who the next closest one is in this market, but I mean, it's probably like 5 or 6 years
Yeah.
compared to our 14 years. But once again, just more proof like we're very, very hungry to make that run at the MLS Cup and win that championship, despite the fact that we've had just great sustained success for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of like the team side and everything that you're doing, I like to try to ground the audience in the reality of our guests on a daily basis, and then I want to get into your evolution. But can you give the folks an idea of like what is a day in the life like? What does it even need to be a chief commercial officer at an MLS team? Again, in New York City, which is such a competitive market.
Yeah, no, it's not boring. I'll tell you. There's a lot going on, and my role as chief commercial officer is a fairly new one. I took that on in September, and prior to that, I was the chief marketing and revenue officer. So, really spanned across the entire business side. But for me, in the chief commercial role, I'm really focusing on our commercial side of the business, our revenue driving area. So the three key members or areas there are ticket sales service, our box office on the ticketing side, sponsorship sales and service, premium sales and service, and then our youth programs as well. And for me, it's really just figuring out how are we able to drive more revenue? How are we able to find more creative ways to drive more revenue? Work closely with the other areas of the business, but also work closely with the world of Red Bull. We're part of a global brand that has many sports properties, including other soccer teams, hockey teams around the world. Red Bull Racing, which is probably the most successful and most exciting sports property in the world right now, as we probably just saw this past weekend in
Yeah.
Vegas. More revenue and bring more value to this brand.
Mhm. It's such a great point. I think that sometimes the New York Red Bulls could be people who aren't really close to it or they don't really understand the whole entity behind that. Being a professional soccer team, leading them is one thing, but again, when you have all those extensions, it really elevates, I think, and extends what you're doing.
Yeah, no, and that's what quite honestly drew me to
Oh,
working here, a
okay.
little over 9 years ago, was that opportunity to be part of something even bigger.
Right.
And yes, being part of a sports property like the New York Red Bulls, being able to be a part of the Red Bull Arena here and all the programming that's here, but being able to be part of the world of Red Bull and all that encompasses and keeps growing, for me was really exciting.
Yeah, yeah, that's so cool. So you talked a little bit about, your evolution, just a little bit, but I want to get into it. We were talking just before we started recording about I love as I've watched your evolution over the years, as I've seen you go from when we were working together, very much like that leading in marketing and the media and bringing all that experience to it. But then again, like that growth to that CMO seat, you've had the CCO seat. So can you talk about like what's evolution been like? And as I said, like I think it was perfect because I think the person who can be in your role who's had all those other that rich experience in all the other areas, it really sets you up for so much success and the organization. But I'd love to hear you talk about your evolution.
Yeah, sure. I always felt that I was a marketer, at heart, and that was really the majority of my career was focusing on the marketing side and branding and all that goes into marketing communications as well.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize until recently how deeply rooted the sales side of it was in already what I was doing, right? And even going back to my time at Madison Square Garden and MSG, where early on, when I was just a marketing coordinator, I recall, a very ambitious young Joe Stetson, like going to the head of sales at the time, Scott Epson, who's still a dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine, and saying to him, "Hey, all your sales reps are coming to us with all these, these baked sales promotions that I, as a marketer, have to execute. And I feel like we could be doing so much more, so much better." And he's like, "All right, hot shot, like go right ahead, start doing it." And he started having me come and join the weekly sales meetings and pitch to them. And then the sales reps started bringing me on sales pitches and developing all these different, brand integrations with all of our sponsors. And I just thought that was just my role as a marketer. And then as my career grew, whether it was our time with the Nets and working so closely, with Brett Yormark and Fred Mangione, who had such great sales acumen, right? And then Mike Savatsky now, and all those other sales figures within the Nets and Brooklyn Sports Entertainment, where marketing was a large part of everything that sales did, from the storytelling to the positioning to the pitching. And it wasn't until, just a few years ago when my boss here, Mark de Grand Prix, who's our general manager and president, said, "Hey, I want you to start overseeing the revenue side." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not a salesperson." He's like, yeah, you are. And I started to take on this more expanded role and didn't realize, number one, how much I loved it. And number two, how much I've already been doing it for 20 plus years. And this was really just part of that evolution of my career, my growth, and to where I am now as a chief commercial officer.
Yeah, it's incredible. As you were saying it, I was thinking about through my career too. I've been a marketer who evolved in the partnership space. And, again, it's like you develop into a salesperson. But I similarly, I would have never said to someone I'm a salesperson. And even to this day, I don't know, I kind of shy away from saying like I'm a salesperson, but it is so true that storytelling, that drawing people in. And I think something that you and I think we're similarly feel, and I think I attribute a lot to what we experience at the Nets and that those people that you talked about, is that value proposition is truly there. And that's what you're taking out to people. And then, there's always that bit of pizzazz that you're going to add to it that we learned there.
It's a marriage, right?
Yeah.
There's a marriage there, and one cannot succeed without the other, right? Because you can't sell a product without being able to know what that value proposition or what that story is, right? And the reverse is true as well.
Yeah. Even this morning, I was writing something up and I found myself writing that the partnership was all about access and experience. And those were exactly the words, remember, like back in the day when we were building that for the Nets, and that's what it was, and Brooklyn, and people weren't necessarily talking about it that way at the time. But I mean, to this day, that's the reality of what it is. And people want that.
It's true. It's true. The two are so related. But so for me, it was a much more natural progression and evolution than I ever imagined.
Yeah, it's so, and I remember at that time, like I similarly with you and Matt Pizarris, who also folks who are listening, he was my boss before Joe came in. I think you replaced him, right? He had left.
So I came on board with the understand that we were going to be working together. So Matt was going to be overseeing marketing on the net side of things. I was going to oversee marketing on the Brooklyn side of things.
Okay.
And because we worked together at Madison Square Garden, there was a lot of excitement from both of us. But shortly after I started, or right before I started, he ended up getting that new position or that new opportunity with Peter Fagan. And so, and then, my role expanded into his role. That's where you and I really started to work together.
I didn't remember the overlap of you and Matt, but the point is both of you similarly, I was always in awe of what I felt was how many tools you had in your toolbox. You weren't just the marketing folks. You knew how to connect all those dots, and you both were similarly imparted those things on me. So I feel so lucky to have, under the leadership of each of you. And I think part of that with you again is, as I said earlier, is about developing people. And so I'd love to hear from you. Where did your philosophy for leadership and your people philosophy, where did that come from? Because it's not exactly the norm, or hasn't been the norm in the past.
It should be, and that's funny because you're right. The more we experience things, the more we realize it's not necessarily the norm. And I think you and I are cut from the same cloth. That collaboration is key, right? Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've always had tremendous mentors, right?
Mm.
And really, was able to learn from folks that valued relationships and valued growing people. And we both came from that Freddie Mangione like
Yeah.
leadership, right? And he was such a just best way to put it. He was just a gracious leader and a generous
Yeah.
boss, right?
Right.
Like I think is a great way of describing it, where he wanted to give us opportunities and wanted us to thrive, but also at the same time, we always knew he had our back if needed,
Yes.
right? And I think that's how I've been very, very fortunate that I've had bosses like a career at Steve
Yeah.
Mars at Madison Square Garden, and Debbie Patiri there as well. And I had similar, bosses at Van Wagner and here, with Mark at the Red Bulls as well, where it's funny that you say like that seems like that should be second nature to all leaders, but that's not always the case, right?
Right.
We've always encountered the opposite too. And sometimes that might work for some folks, that doesn't
Yeah.
work for me. I've said this to people, I might have said this to you, right? Like I never feel like somebody's working for me. I always feel like they're working with me. And I
Right.
always want people to believe that within my departments, within my groups, that I genuinely want like a day where maybe I'm working for them eventually,
Yeah.
and that for me is success, right? If somebody, is able to grow within their role and then grow out of their role, that's exciting for me, right? And I think that for me is more important than than almost anything else as far as I'm concerned in terms of growing businesses and growing people. I think the two of them are the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because you actually then help develop the person that they can be operating at their optimal, they can be operating at their best. And then
Yeah.
again, that work happens for itself and the goodness comes. And I think like again, everybody benefits from that. And I it's been such an honor for me to have people like you come on the show because I believe so firmly in the form of representation. And a lot of times people talk about representation, it's about people who are people of color or a different, sector in the world. And, I really mean we need to see more of it in the seat of leadership. And so I love to be able to have people like you and Matt Cazares and Fred on the show and Elisa Padilla who can come on and show people that even in a space that is tradition has a lot of traditional isms about it, right? In the professional sports space, there is so much room for, and you can show people what great leadership looks like. So, I think we're both fortunate to have some of these, like, goats, you included.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's great that in just being a follower and a fan of your podcast, being able to provide a platform for other leaders like ourselves to be able to tell our stories like that, and how that works for us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't work for everyone, but that works for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say one thing I also am so grateful for, again, when you're talking about kind of like traditional sports space and what people think even traditionally about men and women. And I am so grateful that the experience that I had with you all, that I was always treated fairly. It was always like tough but fair, but it was not like as a woman, didn't have a voice or that never was a part of the ecosystem and environment that we have. So for people who are listening, like, again, like there are places out there and there are great leaders out there that are just because some people experience those things, it doesn't mean that everyone is going to. So, again, I feel really fortunate. Now, listen, I've had my share of experiences with some other folks coming up where I was like, oh, what do you mean I should wear things that accentuate my, my nature, my figure, that kind of thing, So I've had those kind of things. But again, like I never had that with you all. And I just always was treated fairly and given freedom and responsibility and held accountable.
Well, what I appreciate, number one, I appreciate what you just said, but what I also appreciated about you, somebody that I got a chance to work with, like it wasn't just a function, of us providing you with a platform. Like you created a platform. Like it was, until you talk about like us, giving you the opportunity to grow and holding accountable. Like you held us accountable. That was what I really appreciated about our relationship and our dynamic was that you always, you always spoke up and said what needed to be said in times where people were sometimes afraid to say those things. Whether it was a certain promotion that we needed to do, or a certain way that we needed to reach a market in New Jersey or in Brooklyn, like you actually took those opportunities to be able to lead us, even, no matter what your role was at the time, you were leading us as well.
I love that. Thank you so much. By the way, I don't know why I'm going to say this, but I am. I remember distinctly you teaching me, because sometimes I have to remember these specific things as I'm preparing for these. I remember you teaching me how to come up with like the value of a billboard. As that, like, you couldn't actually know it, but it was about like extrapolating the people that would walk by in the street, and like, and it was
There was a
so
science to it.
there's a science to it. And so again, like, I guess the reason why I brought that up is because even in the midst of fast-paced stuff, and we're talking high level about how to lead people, it's also a great example of when you have the ability as a leader to kind of lead by the side or lead behind, because you're letting that person do that thing, but also be present and ready to jump in and teach certain things or jump in and take something over it. I just think it's being able to be more than just a one-dimensional leader is so effective. So that was a very specific example, but it stuck with me.
I remember actually. I remember that time. I remember that moment like vividly, because I remember you also being like, "I'm not leaving your office until I understand this."
So funny. Some of the stuff that seems so obvious to people like Fred and you and Matt Pizarris, it was like I was scrambling to try to soak up as much as I could. Like, how the hell do you know so much stuff?
Somebody
So,
taught us. Like that's what it comes down to, right? Like I think we're all fortunate that the time that people spent with us to teach us and to
yeah.
grow us and mentor us, like it's on us to then do the same thing.
Oh, yeah. I love that you said that. Audience, please. I hope you heard that. I think that, with ever you're like, oh, I don't need to spend that time, or if you do spend that time and you're getting the negative feedback that, oh, you spend too much time with your people, spend time with your people. Impart those nuggets. They are just they're so helpful. I want to ask you about what you're seeing in the sports marketplace. It's so important. I think, like, again, you've been in your seat now there for over 9 years, almost, you're going into your 10th season. So, like, talk about it. So, because again, it's still somewhat new, I think, for a lot of people. So I think it's really important for us to hear about the fan experience and why that's so unique.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, like, you know me well, like I didn't really do much in the soccer space coming here. And my time at Van Wagner kind of dabbled in it a little bit with some of our clients that we had. So this was really, really new to me, when I came on board, and recognizing too that the soccer experience is truly unique. First of all, it's 2 hours of just, running time, versus what you and I experience in basketball or, in baseball or football and hockey even. And what you have is these soccer enthusiasts, right, who just really want 90 minutes of soccer, that might have experienced, global, soccer experiences and want that here. Then you have your sports fans, especially those that are large number of sports fans here and sports teams and properties here, who want the elevated game presentation, right? As well. And then you have families that are looking for to be entertained, pre-game and in-game and halftime and post-game as well. And you have partners that need to be strategically integrated, so you have all these elements, that go into the soccer experience. And I feel like what's so unique here about the New York Red Bulls experience versus some of the other sports properties that I've worked in and worked for is that we have like a little bit of all that for everyone. And the sport of soccer is growing so much, right? Like it really, if you look at the MLS and soccer audience as a whole in North America, it's growing faster than any other sport, right? It's growing, 8 times faster than basketball and baseball, 4 times faster than hockey and football, right? And it's continuing to grow, right? And I think MLS just set the record for largest total attendance just this past 2023 season. Since MLS started in 1996, and it seems like each year it's growing more, and a lot of it also ties back into the youth participation as well, which I think can humbly say, we have the most robust youth program, regional youth program in North America. We reach over 40,000 participants a year just in the New York,
Wow.
New Jersey area. And that, you multiply that by each soccer market, there's so much room for growth, which is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
really exciting time to be part of soccer, which is what it's
It,
why when I came here, I'm like, oh, I'll spend a few years in soccer. Now we're almost 10 years later, and I'm like, never going to leave.
No, I know. I mean, I've always been a basketball fan. I played
Mm-hmm.
basketball and everything. And then when I married my husband, he is British and introduced me to the EPL. And I just love the game. I mean, I went to my first game. Actually, we're a Manchester United fans. So we went to a
Mm-hmm.
game at their field. And it's such an incredible experience. So I hear you on the, ease of switching, not switching over completely, but, like really embracing the sport itself. And it is unique, I think. That's why I was curious, like your take on it, because for me, all I know is from the fan side, it felt so pure, to your point, like the pure game, because it didn't have all of that stopping and starting, and didn't have the degree of game presentation, I guess you'd call it, as we
Yeah.
were used to in the NBA.
But there's still almost that, I wouldn't even call it burden, but that responsibility,
Yeah.
being here in North America, especially in the New York market, of entertaining folks, even
Oh,
finding ways to entertain folks throughout that,
absolutely.
right? And I think that's been a fun experience for, over the years that I've been here, just seeing how we could best evolve that experience.
Yeah.
Bringing in Elisa Padilla, a few months ago to oversee all our marketing communications. She's our new CMO, and even just how she's taking a new perspective to things as well too really excites me a lot about our new season, coming up, 2024.
No, that's really great. I think what being in such a competitive market for people who are listening, if they may be, from an agency side or from the brand side, like how should brand marketers or people who are trying to create that, relationship from the brand side, how should they think about it as being unique?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of things. The for the brands that we talk to, right, that we're trying to, look at for partnerships, for instance, right? Some of the key things that they're looking at or that we're positioning for their partnership with us are a few things. Number one, to be part of a sport that's truly growing,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's shared with you some of the growth metrics there. It's the youngest audience in North American sports. It's the most diverse audience in North American sports. The
Uh-huh.
most digitally savvy and technologically savvy audience as well, which speaks also to the new Apple partnership this past year. The fact that it's the only professional sports league, I think, in the world right now where you can actually watch every single game on one platform, through Apple TV's MLS Season Pass, right? Which is a groundbreaking deal that they had this year that really spoke to the audience that we reach, but also spoke to, a company like Apple. They don't partner up
Yeah,
with
yeah.
MLS unless they truly believed in the product. So you have that. In addition to that, it's exciting. You talked about our days at the Nets,
Yeah.
being the most accessible. This soccer and especially MLS has this accessibility, and we doubled down on it, right? We had, we were averaging at one point close to
Wow.
400 player appearances a year. If you could,
Yeah.
yeah, you could kind of wrap your head around that. Like that's how often our players are in the market. That's how accessible our players are. Our red members, which are our season ticket holders, they have something like a dozen events where they actually have opportunities to meet players. Like that didn't
Uh-huh.
happen when you and I were at the Nets. No matter whether it was Jason Kidd or Devin Harris, like
No.
our season ticket holders weren't meeting those players multiple times a year. So there's that accessibility as well. And then, how it ties into the growth from the youth side, right? Like our ability to reach 40,000 youth participants a year and their families just in the 75-mile radius, like that's an engaged audience that so many brands want to be able to connect with and be able to engage with on a regular basis, that we have that platform to do so. Not only are they participating in our programs, but they're also coming to our matches. They're coming to our games. They're becoming lifelong fans. They're reaching them at that. I forgot who it was that did a study recently that sports fandom
Oh,
really
right.
starts to
Uh-huh.
occur, between the ages of 6 and we're reaching that audience,
Right.
by youth participants, and then they're becoming fans. And then finally, too, just on the community side of things, too, like we are doing things within the community that are far different than a lot of other ways that teams here in this market are able to, the stuff that we do in Newark, the Newark public school system, the mini pitches that we've built over 20 of them in the last 7-8 years in New York and New Jersey, the programming that we're able to provide, the after school programs, the way that we're able to take the sport of soccer and really develop, engage, and inspire the community, through this beautiful game is something that I think is still very, very unique to this market in terms of a sports team being able to do that
absolutely.
on a
I
direct
mean, as you're
basis.
saying, and I can imagine from I lived there for 13 years and I was working there in the, in that environment. So it's so awesome to hear that you're doing that and
Mhm.
touching so many communities, and you're not just reaching the kids through the phones, right? And through the, play this game, or, you're literally going out and touching and feeling them. So that's awesome. That's awesome. And I love that you and Elisa are
Yeah.
partnering to bring that to fruition. What a great match you two are. Yeah. So I know we don't have much time left. So I'm just curious, as you're looking ahead to 2024, is there anything that you're either thinking you're going to see, whether it's for the New York Red Bulls or just the sports market in general? Is there anything that you're thinking you're going to see more of or less of, or that we should see more of or less of?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a
Yeah.
lot of eyes on soccer right now, right? Which is a very fortunate position to be in. When you have the greatest soccer player potentially ever
Yeah.
now, part of Major League Soccer in Messi, right? And what we were able to see this past year, I mean, I think many of us knew that the impact was going to be strong. I think few of us realized it was going to be as strong as what occurred, right? Like the Messi mania that we saw, the way that he was able to just capture the hearts and minds of so many sports fans that might not have gone to a soccer match prior, but now all of a sudden are not only they engage, but I mean they're becoming
Yeah.
season ticket holders. They're coming regularly now. And looking at forward to 2026
Yeah.
with an eye towards the World Cup and knowing that the World Cup is going to be here in North America in just a few years, like there's so much excitement around the sport, and I feel like people are paying
Right.
attention to Major League Soccer. Even prior to Messi joining, they're seeing the growth there. Now you add in the GOAT,
Yeah.
that is part of it. Now you're seeing how other teams are saying, all right, wait a minute, we've got to up our game.
Yeah.
We got to raise our standards. So you're going to see a lot of teams, us included, that are going to try to
Mhm.
improve the product on the pitch in terms of the types of players that that teams are bringing on board throughout the offseason, innovation just in terms of the fan experience,
Yeah.
performance on the soccer side as well. And then, everybody's, I think, road mapping, especially in the world of soccer, especially Major League Soccer,
Right.
everybody's road mapping to 2026 saying, all right, we've got to capitalize on these next couple of years between the types of players and the stars that are part of Major League Soccer now, and then what's to come in 2026 with the World Cup coming here. There's this great window that I think everybody's looking at as this phenomenal opportunity for us to really grow that sport even more than than
Yeah,
some of the growth
yeah,
numbers we
so
shared with you
exciting. And then
earlier.
when I heard that I don't know if it's actually decided yet, but the finals of the World Cup were down to New York and Texas. So, I mean,
One,
uh,
it should be decided soon. I mean, I'm praying that that
regardless,
it's
yeah.
here. But regardless, it's just going to be so exciting to be knowing that there will be matches that are going to play right down the road at MetLife Stadium, but knowing that this building here, as well as our new training facility that we're going to be building and opening in 2025, will be utilized as training grounds, programming for the World Cup. Like we know we're going to be part of that story in a
That's
big way,
incredible.
so we're excited to be part of it as well. And we're working
Oh,
closely
yeah.
with the New York
Yeah.
and New Jersey host
Okay.
committee as
Awesome.
well.
Sorry, my brain went to, I know some folks over there. Well, actually, Dan Lynch, who was over at the Nets
Yeah,
with us, is there. Bruce
Dan Lynch is there.
Redman is over there,
Yes.
who
Yeah.
I had known from a previous,
Yes.
kind of our careers crossing.
Yeah. Bruce from the New
Yeah,
York
yeah,
City
yeah.
side, Lauren from the New Jersey
Great
side. I mean, it's
group,
a
great
great
group.
group that they
So,
have over there.
well, I'm so glad that we got to talk about so much here today, Joe. And before I let you go, I end every show with asking
Me too.
people, with the guests, what they hope that the audience takes away from your episode. So, again, we covered so many things. So if you could share, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I touched on this topic so much just in our brief time now together, but
Yeah.
it's about the people. Yeah, not necessarily the work, right? The work is one thing, and hopefully there will always be work. Hopefully we're fortunate enough to continue to work in this space. But it's the people that you do it with that really makes the difference. It's the mentors through the process. It's the mentees that you get to develop and get to see grow. It's the teammates that you grow up with. I mean, I grew up in this industry. I started when I was 19. I literally feel like I grew up in this industry, right? But it's also those teammates that battle with you through the trenches, right? It's the ones that, and most importantly, the ones that I'm realizing now more than ever, are the most important.
Oh
It's the
yeah.
family members who support you through this process. Like, we work in a very unique industry where sometimes we're working 6, 7 days a week, crazy hours, so to be able to have, your family that supports you through this, whether it's your partner, your
Yeah.
husband, your wife, your parents, your kids, you can't lose sight of it. And that's what makes this special. Not necessarily the wins or the losses.
Yeah,
It's really
absolutely.
who
I
you're
love
doing it
that you
with.
said that. And I was actually over the weekend listening to Fred Mangione's episode, and he literally I said so much of what you said. So you are cut from a wonderful cloth. And again, I just am so grateful that you've been a part of my journey. You've made such a big impact on me and so many others that I know. And so you've got a fan in me for your team. I will continue to support and always champion you anything you and at least be a touch. So thank you again so much, Joe.
Thank you, Shauna. I mean, you've always really just been just a beacon of light and for me throughout my career here. And it's just great that we're able to connect once again. And,
Yeah,
hoping
absolutely.
to
Thank
talk
you
to you
so
soon.
much. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.